Hello, Jonathan. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's Jonathan Brinsden, and I'm a partner in the charities and not-for-profit practice here at Birch and Dyson Bell. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Um, how would you describe the legal responsibilities of charity trustees?
I would describe them as quite demanding, I suppose, in a nutshell. There are a variety of different duties and obligations to which trustees are subject, and there is some variation between whether your organisation is unincorporated or whether it is incorporated. On the one hand, you'll have lots of implied fiduciary obligations, which have evolved over a period of years and centuries by way of case law. And with companies, some of those duties have now been codified if you're a director of a company. But broadly speaking, if you were to try and encapsulate it, um, a trustee's obligation is essentially to act in such a way in the best interest of their organisation. And there are a variety of sort of sub-duties which hang off the back of that about best utilisation of assets, um, not placing yourself in a position of conflict, acting collectively, and so on. But I think it's the first duty about acting in the best interest of your organisation, which, if you keep that at the front and centre of your mind, then it will be difficult to go too far wrong in relation to the sub duties. There's also an expectation that you will apply yourself in a reasonable and prudent manner. So again, that's not typically a duty that's hard to satisfy, but it doesn't mean, as some people may interpret it, that you must go about being a trustee in a very risk-averse and cautious way. So there's a difference between prudence and overt cautiousness, because the charity sector is one which is known for innovation, pushing the boundaries, and you wouldn't be able to do any of that if everybody sat on their hands and said that's too difficult.
Absolutely. What are the commonest mistakes that, in your experience, trustee boards make?
I think the one that you see time and time again is that it is often the case that trustees are recruited through contacts who already exist on the board, and you may get a tap on your shoulder and say, you know, we would really value your experience and know-how around our table, and that often can be very flattering. But what tends to happen is that the know-how and common sense which people would apply to being asked to have an equivalent position in the private sector, on a private company, somehow gets forgotten when you're asked to sit on a board. So, and this we have seen this so many times that people kind of park those instincts at the door of a charity board meeting, because there is this perception that charities are somehow removed from the slings and arrows of the private sector and the responsibilities and liabilities that go along with that. So what I would say is that if you're ever invited to be a trustee, aside from reading all the profusion of guidance which exists out there and is there to be read, is to sit in on the trustee meeting before accepting, review the constitution, or have some asked to see the constitution of the charity that's inviting you to come along. Have a look at the accounts, and don't be afraid to ask questions and challenge some of the status quo thinking when you arrive, because you'll often find that actually people have either would like to ask those questions, or when they were recruited, it was already the status quo, and these things go unchallenged year after year after year. So go into it with an open mind, but do your homework first, so that you know what you're getting involved with.
That's very good advice. And how serious can the consequences be for the individual and for the organisation?
Well, trustees are jointly and severally liable for the activities of their organisation. So, in one sense, you're all in it together. Liability, there are potential liabilities, attendant risks to being a trustee, and they differ slightly between being an unincorporated charity and being an incorporated charity. If you are incorporated, then you have the benefit of limited liability in relation to commercial contracts which that charity may enter into with third parties, and that includes normal things like, employees, um, a lease on a building, a license to use a photocopier. All of those sorts of fairly commonplace things are contractual arrangements, and you'll get the benefit of limited liability if something goes wrong, i.e. that is not your personal responsibility. None of that will apply to an unincorporated charity, where the trustees will find themselves individually responsible for any commercial and contractual risks which may apply. That's not to say they can't be indemnified out of the assets of the unincorporated charity, but if you run out of assets, then it's you who are on the hook. Well, what applies to both is personal liability may also arise in circumstances where you operate in what we call breach of trust, where you operate in a way which is wholly contradictory to your fiduciary obligations or outside the scope of your constitution, and the result is that the charity itself suffers loss. In those circumstances, you can be on the hook to make good that loss to the charity, and that's where good governance comes into play, which is essentially about risk management and how to go about things in the right way.
And on the back of that, do you have any inspirational messages for people who are trustees or who want to be trustees in Trustees Week?
Well, I remember doing trustee training a couple of years ago, and we were talking about the responsibilities and duties of trustees and how they are, albeit that they're volunteers and they're not there day to day, they are ultimately responsible for everything which happens on their watch. And a bright spark at the back of the room said, "Oh, well, it sounds like only God need apply." And I would probably say that I'm sure whilst he would be eligible, I'm sure it can sometimes feel that way. But I would suggest that whilst we live in a complex world, you should not be put off by getting involved in something that you feel passionately about. And all of these things can be, all these potential risks or uncertainties can actually be resolved quite easily just by doing a little bit of homework and research about your organisation.
Thank you very much. That's most interesting.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.